Is that a
It's
sensitive
growing.
question?
No, it's not. Yeah, I, I've had anywhere between like 80 to 180 views.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
so not a lot yet. But usually it's like we have 0 viewers right now, but you know, it'll usually we'll have one or two or three that join live, and a lot of people watch after.
Oh, cool.
So
Yeah,
anyway, we're live now.
we are live. I see
Yep,
the little
we are
thing.
live. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and start. So anyone who is watching this, I have with me today Shay Logan, who happens to be the husband of the person that I interviewed last time, Kim Logan, and they have a very academic family, apparently. So yeah, I went to school with Shay as well. So Shay, thank you for joining. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, for sure. So Shay kind of has a unique approach with math and philosophy. So we're going to kind of dive into that. But to really kind of start things off, first thing I wanted to ask you, which I asked him, was were you interested in math when you were really young and were you good at it, or did that happen kind of later on for you?
Yeah, I was good at it when I was younger, and I was interested in it from a young age. Uh, can I tell it? Can I tell a story? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
I would love to hear the story.
Okay. So my first it wasn't my first job, but it was the coolest job I ever had was when I worked at a theater in Plains, Montana. That's where I grew up. Little tiny town, nowhere, western Montana, and I was the cash register. I didn't run the cash register. I just was the cash register. I would just stand there. People would order things, and I would add up what they owed us really fast
Are you
in my head.
serious?
Yeah,
That is amazing. I had never
yeah,
heard that story.
yeah. Montana doesn't have sales tax, so this was doable. So I would just sit there and do arithmetic really quickly, and that was my entire job.
Wow,
It was great.
that is amazing. How old were you at that time?
I think I got the job when I was like 14, so I had it like all through high school.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was like a tourist attraction kind of. People would like bring their family in just to see me do arithmetic really quick.
That's amazing. Did you make cash register noises as well?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, every time.
To be
Cha-ching!
entertaining? Yeah, exactly. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you like in school though, everything you were just like math was kind of your thing.
Yeah, yeah, it was always something I was good at. I mean, we didn't have a lot of options where I went to school.
Yeah.
So it's not like I did tons and tons of math in high school or like took college classes in high school. That wasn't on the table. Like because it was just too small a town. But yeah, from like pretty young, I was always good at math, and that's what I did.
So you ended up going to Gonzaga. Was that because it was close to Montana and you knew about it, or
No, it was an accident. This will be a theme if I keep telling you stories.
that it was an accident?
Yeah, most things in my life it was like happy accidents. Uh, I joined the army when I was 17 to like get out of town, and then I did like this split op thing where you do some of your training and then you go back to high school and then you finish your training up. And in between there, I was like drilling with a reserve unit in Missoula, and the person who the battalion commander for that reserve unit like met everybody who joined it, and he saw I had really high ASVAB scores, which is the test you take to like see if you're good at anything when you join the army. It's a really weird test. It has questions like which of these is a ball peen hammer, and they just have pictures of hammers and you have to
What?
identify. Yeah, it's
Really?
a really, or at least when I took it, like back whenever I took it, it was a really
Yeah,
weird test.
that's interesting.
Yeah, but anyways, I did really well on it, so he was like, hey, have you ever thought about going to college? And I was like, no. So
And here you are, a professor now.
right, yeah. So he knew what I needed to do to get like transferred to like officer producing program. That's a thing you can do apparently. And so then I went to ROTC at Gonzaga.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, that's
So it was
cool.
kind of
And
an accident.
it was just kind of a natural thing that you ended up majoring in math in because you were like, well, I'm good
Yeah.
at this, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. It was the only thought I had. And then, you know, since you were required at Gonzaga to take a ton of philosophy classes,
Yep.
I thought it would be good to have a second major, and that was the easiest second major to get.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, like I think we had to take at least 3 philosophy classes, and
Yeah. Yeah. I think it
yeah,
was four, actually. I think you
that's,
had to take three religion and
was it?
four philosophy.
Okay, yeah, it was a
Yeah.
lot. Oh, well, oh, like
It
and no religion too. I thought it was like three of both, something like that. Yeah, it was a
was a
lot.
lot.
Yeah. Because that's how I felt. I was like, shouldn't I be getting some other minor for this?
Right. Yeah. So that's why I got a second major in it, just
Yeah,
because it was easy.
yeah,
Uh,
that was smart. Did you take
and now
any?
I have a PhD in
Did you
it.
take any computer science while you were there?
Not even a single class. No.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay, that's
regret it.
interesting.
Should have. Um, I really regret it. I regret not learning more about that shit.
Do you
Stuff.
see? I
I don't
mean,
know.
you would be good at it. I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand with math, so that's why I was curious.
Yeah, and I do logic all the time now. That's why that's what I call myself a logician. So it
Yeah, I
makes
know
sense.
exactly. That's the other thing I was thinking.
Yeah. So I really regret not taking computer science, but I
That's
didn't.
interesting. Well, what's funny about me is like I was kind of taking math. I switched majors a couple times when I was doing math all along. I ended up as a math major, but originally I was just going to minor in it, and I was majoring in computer science. And I remember one day I had this epiphany. I was like, "Man, I do not want to sit at a desk all day for work." And here I am sitting at a desk all day for work. But but what ended up, yeah, I was like, it was a school project, and I love computer science, but I was like, I think I'm going to go the math route, and then I ended up majoring in math, and of course, full circle, I'm working at a desk. But
Yeah. Well, you know.
yeah, that's how life goes, right?
Yeah. Turns out it's hard to avoid them desk jobs.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's hard to avoid. So actually, I'm curious. As a professor, how much are you sitting at a desk?
um, a lot. Yeah, or at a table. I mean, so like you like to think of like there's a few like misconceptions about the professor and gig, right? Like it
Yeah,
looks like you're just gonna be so like from the outside as a student, you're like, what these people do is teach. Um, and this teaching is like this like minuscule portion of what you
yeah,
do with your
yeah.
time, right? And like it's not just like the prepping for classes and the grading, which also takes a lot of time. But there's like tons of committee work that you never see your professors doing that they're spending lots of time on.
I
Um,
believe that.
so silly committees, right? Like the university decides they need to rethink what's going to be sold in the vending machines, and they need to make a committee, and like someone's got to be on it, and like so
Wait,
then
are you
you're on.
serious? The actual vending machines at the school?
I don't know, I just made that one up. That I've never been
Oh,
on that committee.
okay.
There are
I'll be.
ridiculous committees
I
of
was
all
like,
sorts.
I want to be on a committee like that.
We must taste test all of the
Yeah,
possible
yeah,
options.
exactly. That's
But yeah, no,
hilarious.
there's just tons of committee work, and then of course, like the majority of a lot, not everyone, but the majority of many professors' time is spent on research, and that's what you spend.
Yeah. Okay, that makes
Um,
sense. And that's where you're at your desk quite a bit.
yep, and then the committee work is at a desk
Yeah.
or a table with other
That
people
makes sense.
that don't want to be
You're
there.
sitting
Yeah,
down.
yeah, yeah, one way or another.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
but the
So
teaching is standing up and wandering around, so that's
so
good.
to back up a little bit, we'll get into the teaching part. I remember at Gonzaga, I was telling you this story before. I remember you in math classes. You would not show up to class for like most of the semester, and then you show up and you do extremely well in the exams, like every time. So you're really smart. And I'm curious if you did that in any of your other classes, or if this was just a math specific thing for you.
No, this was my entire undergraduate experience.
That's kind of what I thought.
uh,
I
I
also
took
remember talking to you. We had this, for anyone who's watching, we had this thing called the math lab, which was a room where we tutored, and Shay and I were tutors in there. And I remember him telling me one time, he's like, "Yeah, it's great. Like for food, I go find pizza at these free events, and then sometimes I'll sleep in the math lab." Like,
yeah,
are you serious?
I went a whole semester, maybe it was even longer than that, without paying for food. I was able to
Yeah,
swing that.
I remember you talking about that.
Yeah, so the Tom McKenzie, who was the department chair in our math department at the time, he would, whenever there was free food, like anywhere in the building, he would text me and be like, "Hey, there's free food in room 302," and I'd be like, "Okay, I'm coming."
That is amazing. I'm sure that sounds like a very healthy diet right there. A lot
It
of
was,
pizza.
yeah, extremely healthy. Pizza and then like cold cuts, lots of cold cuts.
Oh yeah, yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
So this was your approach to all your classes: was read the text, show up for the test,
Yeah,
basically.
I just like so I'm not a I just don't learn a ton from being in class.
Yeah.
And it's cool. I'm not saying that you should be like me. I don't think this is like a great approach.
So any of Shay's students that are
Yeah,
watching,
yeah,
here's a prime example.
yeah. uh, I guess what it's more like is like you should figure out what works for you when it comes to learning, and then do
Yeah,
that a bunch. So like I would never go to class, but I would probably spend more time reading the textbook than I would have. Like, I don't know. Like I would spend those hours outside of the classroom reading not just our textbook, but I would always try to find alternates at the library. So like
yeah,
if we were
that makes
learning linear
sense.
algebra, I would look at our linear algebra textbook, and then like two or three others that I would have checked out from the library,
Yeah,
and learn the same material from several perspectives until I understood it my way.
yeah.
And then,
Actually, this is an interesting topic because I feel like, I mean, everyone has a different method of kind of learning things. And I feel like now, I mean, even compared to 10, 15 years ago, with the amount of stuff that's online and the amount of tools, do you feel like the education system is going to kind of change over time? Or you think we'll still have the traditional university system the way it is? I mean, with tuition costs and the way things are going,
yeah.
I mean, obviously, this is a job you want to keep. So,
Right,
but I'm
right.
curious
No,
on
no,
your
no.
thoughts on
This
that.
is a great question. Do I see the university system sticking around? So, like, I don't know how much the online stuff's going to be what kills it, right?
Yeah.
I think if it's going to get killed, it's going to get killed because of other sorts of problems that universities are facing. So, like, it is incredibly expensive to go to school, and that doesn't just have an impact in the sense that like people can't afford to go. It also means the people that are there have to treat it very differently.
Right.
You can't take a class for fun when you're paying that much for it, and you can't take a risk and like really try to do something hard when you're paying so much for it. You've got to be cautious, and like also you really do have to think about the financial outcome at the end when you're paying so much for school.
Exactly. Yeah.
And all of these just mean like as an educator, I'm really at a heavy disadvantage. Like you're
Yeah.
not there to learn, and it makes no rational sense for you to be here to learn.
Totally.
So it puts me in a weird spot.
Yeah. No, it really does. So you think more the cost is kind of what's driving things more than even like the other tools that are available
Yeah.
in terms of maybe what might change.
Yeah, because I mean I don't think so. Look, I mean when it became inexpensive to have printed texts, like post Gutenberg, let's say,
Yeah.
right? It's not like the university collapsed then, right? It blew up because once everyone had the opportunity to start learning, they wanted to go to the centers of learning and learn
Yeah.
yet more.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good
So
point.
I think if we had tons and tons of available stuff for people to watch online, people get excited about things and then go to university to learn
Yeah.
more from the experts.
That's a
Um,
good point.
but I don't think, yeah, I think as things stand, universities are in trouble.
Yeah.
We're in a weird situation right now. But we're about to go down into like Shay Logan's socialist rant. So,
Hey, I don't mind. I don't mind hearing your socialist. Go for it.
but that would be like quite a different topic than I intended than we were supposed to be talking
It's
about. So,
probably a little philosophical, at least.
yeah, I guess. I also feel like I'm pretty uninformed. Like, yeah. So,
That's all right. We're just here to bounce ideas off each other. So. Uh, actually, okay. So we'll back up to you majored in math. Then after that, how did you decide to go? I mean, obviously you got a PhD, but how did you decide to go that route?
yeah. So, there's a dark part to the story. It goes like this, but then it gets good again later. So
All right.
everyone knows. So like, I don't know if you remember this, but my senior year of college, I broke my arm really, really bad.
I actually do remember that.
Yeah, yeah, broke
Yeah.
it in half. And
I don't
then
remember how you broke it though.
I was snowboarding.
Oh, that's right.
And
Yeah.
I fell and broke it, like spiral fractured my humerus, and it was like literally in two separate pieces.
That is
And
insane. So are you pretty much
yeah.
fully healed from that, or you still have pain from that?
Yeah. So like, here I can actually do this. So like, uh, my arm doesn't go any higher than that. This arm actually also got messed up in a different accident.
Oh man, that's crazy.
And then as far as
So it's like
rotation,
it gets like it's the shoulder basically that's kind of
yeah, it
getting
just
messed up.
stops there. It's like
Okay.
I can't go any higher. And then in rotation, this arm like it doesn't rotate past like perpendicular. Um,
Wow,
so,
that's crazy.
but I mean, luckily, like there's not many times in your life when you need to do that, right?
Yeah, that's all I was gonna say. That's true. At least you can do most of the things you
Yeah,
need
the
with your arm.
mobility I'm missing is like, meh,
Yeah,
I wasn't using it
yeah,
anyways, you know. But yeah, so I did that, and then I rebroke it, right, like the very like second half of spring semester or something of our senior year, um, and then I had surgery the second time to like bolt it back together,
yeah.
and then so like by the time I recovered from all of that, I'd been on pain meds for like 8 months, and I got pretty hooked on them. Um, because it's impossible not to when you take them for that
I
long.
was gonna say that's insane. 8 months.
Yeah, you're
So,
gonna get hooked on them. Like, there's no
what kind of pain meds are you taking?
Vicodin, almost entirely
Damn,
Vicodin.
yeah, that's not good for 8 months.
No, and it's like no one really told me this. There was no like, oh, hey, you're gonna be
Yeah.
addicted to these. It's gonna be weird. They were just like, oh, by the way, you're done now, and I was like, ah.
Wow.
So I was in a bad spot because of that, and then I was also in a bad spot because like that meant the whole arm thing meant I wasn't doing my army thing that I thought I was gonna be doing.
Right.
So like I was like kind of coming off an addiction plus had no future where I thought I had a future. And
So
so
your whole plan of going through school was just do the math thing, but then go into the army. And
yeah,
take that route.
that was my whole plan. It was nice. Someone else had my future figured out for
Yeah,
me.
that's true.
So I think Tom McKenzie, again, the department chair in the math department at Gonzaga, he like kind of saw I was floundering and threw me a couple of classes to teach, which is like really a lucky thing. So like
Yeah.
the fall semester right after we graduated, I taught a couple classes at Gonzaga. Like,
With your undergrad degree.
with my undergrad degree,
Yeah,
like 10 minutes after I graduated.
I remember hearing about this. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's right.
And so while I was doing that, I was like, oh, this is a pretty cool gig.
So what classes did you teach at that point?
I taught, let's see, I think I taught business calculus and introductory stats, I think.
Nice.
I think that's right.
How did you make calculus different for business people?
Oh, yeah. You never teach them. So, like, the class just goes, here's how derivatives work. I promise.
So you
memorize
basically
these.
don't prove anything.
The word limit never comes up even once. Yeah.
You just throw formulas out.
Yeah. And then be like, I promise this derivative thing measures rate of change. Don't ask me why. And like, that's the whole class over and over again.
Nice.
I promise that this works. Yeah. So, anyways, I applied to grad school after that because the gig looked cool. And
That's awesome. So did you have like a year in between, or just a semester basically, where you were teaching that, and then you went?
It was a year. Yeah, it's really hard to enter a PhD program in a spring semester. That's like
okay, that makes sense.
It's pretty unheard of. Yeah, and part of the reason is because most PhD level classes are, whether they look like this or not, they're year-long classes, right? It'll be like the first half and second half of one class.
Yeah.
And so if you came in the middle, there'd be nothing for you to do.
Totally, that makes sense. So you ended up going to which school for this?
University of Minnesota.
All right, which is where you're at now, right? Or you're
in Minneapolis. Yeah, I just finished a postdoc at NC State.
Okay.
And now I'm back in Minneapolis. And I'll be teaching at McAllister College in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So give us like the progression of like when you started working on your grad degree. Were you like, was your thought, I'm just going to get a master's, I'm going to get a PhD? And like, did you know you were going to do math and philosophy, or just philosophy? What was kind of your mindset going into that?
Yeah, so I chose so like when I was applying for grad school, I applied in both math and math and philosophy PhD programs. And believe it or not, I'm in philosophy for the money.
Wow, do you make more as a philosophy professor than a?
No, I just got more I got a better fellowship to do philosophy.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So, and then when I got here, so I had a fellowship, so I didn't have to teach my first year. And so I took a bunch of math classes with the required philosophy classes that I was taking, and just like tried to pursue both tracks.
Yeah.
And then I got another really big fellowship for my years 3, 4, and 5, I guess. My second year I had to teach, but years 3, 4, and 5 I had an NSF fellowship, National Science Foundation.
Oh, nice.
Fellowship to do philosophy again. So I just stuck with philosophy largely because they kept giving me money to stick with philosophy. That income stream has pretty much dried up at this point.
Gotcha.
But for a while there, it was really working out.
Nice.
So so I came in. I was admitted to a PhD program. I only applied to PhD programs. I didn't apply to any terminal master's programs. But I was open when I came in to switching from the philosophy department to the math department, which is a thing that is, whatever.
But you ended up like along the way, because of the classes you took, you got a master's in math along the way. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it took me
Almost like
3
a
years.
complementary master's as you were going.
They call it an auxiliary master's.
Oh, there you
Yes,
go. Okay.
yeah, yeah, that's the official term. And yeah, yeah. So I did that uh, largely because, and I'm extremely glad I did. So for anyone out there who's listening to this and wants to do philosophy, uh, getting the backup master's degree in something else where there's jobs is a really good idea. So my first job was
That's
at
what I. That's actually what I was going to ask you is how practical it is to get a job as a professor in philosophy.
extremely not practical. It's
Okay,
very, very hard.
so you're pretty happy to have the gig that you have.
Yeah, yeah. So my first gig was at Smith College in a math department.
Okay.
And then I spent 2 years in the philosophy department at NC State, and now I'm back in the math department at McAllister College. Um, it's just so hard to get philosophy jobs,
Wow.
and I'm not. I don't have a problem getting. And now these are not prestigious positions. You know, they're like teaching positions, temporary contracts, but they're really good schools. I mean, Smith College is a really good school. McAllister
Yeah.
College is a really good school, and the students are fun to teach. And they don't abuse me horribly, and like you know,
Not horribly, just a little bit.
yeah, just a little bit. Uh, so
So, so
it's not bad.
do you feel like it's hard because there's just not a lot of philosophy programs out there, or what do you think the difference between like a philosophy professor and a math professor?
Yeah, part of it is the programs. Part of it's also how many classes the programs offer. Like almost any university you go to, most students are going to be required to take some math classes. So this just means they need a
Yeah.
lot of people to staff those positions, right?
Yeah.
Um, but most universities, Gonzaga aside, obviously,
Yeah.
most students
Don't
can get by without taking a single philosophy class.
see. That's a good point, actually. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Almost every degree program you're in, math is required.
Yeah.
Some sort of math is required.
Yep.
So yeah,
And so you have to have a ton of people around to just fill all those, like, just teach all those classes, and that
yeah,
just makes for there being a lot more openings.
that's interesting.
Also, people with philosophy PhDs don't have a ton of other options, right? Like,
Yeah,
so it's not like in the math world where like a good chunk of the people getting math PhDs are leaving for the industry. Um, that's not happening in the philosophy world, and so
yeah.
the supply and demand is like there's just a ton of PhDs relative to how many spots there are.
Or you could write a book, sell it, and make a lot of money doing that.
You make like nothing of writing books. I have written a book. I've made like
No one's buying it, Shay. What's going on?
people are buying it. You make like yeah. I've made dozens of dollars on it. Dozens. Like,
Oh, okay, there you go. Oh, that's funny. So, I mean, yeah, I guess like so philosophy. Give people an idea, like what kinds of things you study in philosophy. I mean, like maybe people understand like some of the basic classes. I don't know, but like you're getting a PhD in philosophy. What kinds of things are you touching on? What kinds of things are you studying?
yeah, so I do logic, and I think the best way to think about what that means is I build formal models of language, and then I study the mathematical features of these formal models of language and use that to shed light on traditional philosophical questions. Um,
So can you give like viewers an example of like, let's say, I mean, what would an example be? Not parentheses A and B equals not A or not B. Is that the kind of logic you're doing, or like, can you
yeah,
give?
except for the equals is incorrect.
Okay,
Those
so
aren't identical, right?
explain that.
Good, good. So those are definitely different sentences.
So so
It's
let's yeah talk about that.
Yeah, good. So, yeah, this is important. So, we definitely want to distinguish the sentence, "It is not the case that A and B," from the sentence, "It is neither the case that A nor the case that B." Those are different sentences, for sure, right? They have different words in them,
Right.
right? So they're definitely different sentences. Um, and
So
it turns out,
let's use to help people along. Let's use some words like maybe like cloudy and rainy, like or something
good,
like.
good. Yeah. So think about, "It is not the case that it is both cloudy and rainy," versus, "It is neither cloudy nor rainy." Those are definitely different sentences,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yep.
but they seem to have the same truth conditions, right? Whenever one of them is true, so is the other, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And we can give an explanation of this in terms of how the word not behaves, how the word and behaves, and how the word or behaves. Um, and so, what we do in logic generally is study features of language that are kind of like that. You say like, look, these two things seem to have this certain behavior. For example, they seem to have the same truth conditions. They're true in all the same cases. That's interesting. Why?
Mhm.
And you can explain it in terms of the behavior of certain words. And so if we did all of that in natural language, we'd be doomed because natural language is really, really complicated, right?
Right, right.
And so, but a lot of actually interesting philosophical questions hinge on how words in natural language seem to behave. Like the word exists seems to behave in a certain way. Like um, if I can say there, like, you know, 3 is prime, it seems to follow from that that there exists at least one prime. That's not complicated. On the other hand, I can say Pegasus is a winged horse. It doesn't seem to follow from that that there exists a winged horse, right? So
Ah,
that's strange. Like, why doesn't like what is happening here? Like one of
yeah,
these, the inferences seem like they're exactly the same, but one of
right.
them I'm like, yeah, that's right, and the other one, like, no, that's definitely not right.
They're
How
they're
can
they're structured the same, but yet because of experience, would you
or
say?
something? It's hard to
Or
say exactly what's going on there, right?
yeah, because like one we know is a myth. Well, we don't know. There could be a winged horse.
There could be. We also aren't entirely sure that numbers exist, so you
That,
know.
well, that's also true. Something that we made up.
Yeah. So, yeah, you know, you think like if we had to deal with all this actually in natural language with all of its crazy baggage, it would be really hard. And so, what logicians do is we build um, you build fake languages that
Yeah.
look like natural language in certain ways, and then you study the fake languages where the problems are a little easier and try to translate those results down to what's happening in natural language.
That is very interesting. I mean, don't you feel like a lot of like arguments that happen today come down to semantics? I feel like a lot of people aren't speaking the same language or don't have the same assumptions or the same meanings if you
Yeah,
like break it all down.
yeah, I feel like that happens a lot. I also feel like a lot of arguments don't get anywhere because of like a simple attention span issue where it's like we're talking about this topic and like
Yeah,
yes, we need to answer these other questions, but like
right.
don't just keep going down that rabbit hole. Come back to it. And like so I know that sounds like a silly like academic thing to yell about. Like kids these days don't have a long enough attention span, right? But I really do think that studying logic makes a difference here because we give you. It's not just that we model sentences. We actually have formal models of like complex things in language, like arguments.
Yeah,
Um, and I can show you, like, when you take a logic class, one of the things you learn is like, here is a way to model what an argument looks like, and just knowing, like, here's like broadly speaking, a picture of what's happening in an argument. Totally changes the way you perceive arguments.
that's interesting.
So, and so this is part of why they make law students study logic and things like that. Like,
That makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
So like backing up to the example of not parentheses A and B, and I said equals not
right.
A or not B. What would you say they have the same truth conditions instead of saying equals?
Yeah, you might say they're equivalent.
Equivalent.
They're definitely not because equals suggests identity, right? Like they're literally the same thing, and they aren't.
Right.
They aren't
Right.
literally the same thing. And so, yeah, I think, and so like actually, this is one of my pet peeves, and when I teach math classes, is people abuse the equal sign all the time. It really frustrates me. Right?
Yep.
Like the equal sign means that the two things are literally like
Yeah.
the two expressions are just different names for the same object, and
Hmm.
like that's what that means. And like unless you have that relationship happening, don't use an equal sign.
Right. So you're going to be the nitpicky professor that like docks some points for that. I remember there was a professor that docked points
Scott Coble, yeah,
when you would do an integral, like oh you would do an indefinite integral and you didn't put a plus c at the end. I remember getting docked on that one quite a bit.
yeah. So I don't actually normally dock people points for that. I just try to. So this is I do it worse than that. I try to write problems that I think are going to make people make mistakes if they do that kind of thing.
Oh, okay,
So
there
then
you
I
go.
just dock you for the
That's
mistake, and I say, you know how to
that's a
avoid that mistake.
that's a good way to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like it.
there is a reason why we do these things the right way.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Um,
So, when you like, what was your PhD in then? Like, when you actually like drill down to your thesis, is it something that you can explain in simple terms, or not so much?
yeah, I think. I mean, so okay, so I did what they call a stapler dissertation. I wrote a whole bunch of papers while I was a grad student and got them published, and then I stapled them together and called it a dissertation. And the dissertation defense kind of came down to like, why do you think this is good enough? And my response was because it's published. And they were like, yeah, that's a good reason. And then like,
That is
there
awesome.
was more to it than that. They actually
I
asked good
believe that.
questions, but like
Yeah.
there was some sense in which that's what it came down to. So
So
yeah,
I mean, did you have to defend it in any way? Like they just drilled you with questions one day and you explained stuff?
yeah. But I mean, I knew what questions they were going to ask ahead of time. And then the other thing was, so kind of my skill as a philosopher is that I can do really technical, heavy duty math. And so the philosophical work I was doing relied on that. And so there was the advantage of like being like when it came down to like drilling on it, I could just fall back on the math and let it do the work for me.
Yeah.
And that's nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Like once I set up the details of the model, then I could just let the math do the work. And then all I had to have in mind was like the explanation of why the model was something we should be into. But with all that said, what I wrote about, there were sort of two topics. One was category theory, and the other one was what was the other one? Well, I guess maybe there's three topics. Category theory, this thing called neologism,
Okay.
and then social constructivism in the philosophy of mathematics. So those were like, I guess, the three topics. And I guess so. Like probably the hardest of them to explain is category theory, and I'm trying to think of intelligent things to say that aren't false. So if you do foundations of mathematics, the standard framework. So like foundations of mathematics, I should say what that is before I say anything more. In like the late 19th century, people started realizing that there were serious issues in math. Like people would publish something and be like, "I've proved blah," and then someone else would be like, "Yeah, but I have a counterexample to blah, so you can't have proved it." And then they would look at these two
Yeah.
things and be like, "I don't know which of them is right." I mean, it was more sophisticated than that, but this was kind of going on in the 19th century, and so people realized we need like some ground level stuff that we all take for granted and we all accept. And any other chunk of mathematics has to be reducible, at least in principle, to that stuff. Otherwise, we're not going to buy it.
Right.
So that's how we're going to check whether something's good or not, is whether you can reduce it to this ground level thing. And the standard thing to use for that ground level stuff is called set theory. It's not particularly exciting, right? It's just sets, collections of things. And you have these axioms called the ZFC axioms that tell you which sets exist. And then you rebuild everything else inside that. And it's kind of surprising that you can, and set theory is really cool and beautiful and awesome and fun. But in the late 1950s, going through to like the 1980s, there was a huge push to use, and it's still going on to some extent, depending on who you talk to use this alternative foundation called category theory. And the picture to have in mind is like where set theory just talks about collections. Like these things are in this set collection. Okay.
Like the set of real numbers.
The set of real numbers, or the set containing you, me, and the third viewer's favorite color, or something like that. I mean, I don't know. These are all perfectly good sets. I mean, ZFC deals with simpler sets. There's the empty set, and the set containing the empty set, and the set containing the set containing the empty set. And like, there's not actually a lot of excitement, except there's a ton of excitement, it turns out. But the only primitive thing you actually have going on is this containment relation. In category theory, the primitive thing is instead of just this containment relation, you have things and like arrows going in between them. And so you can think about this as like ways things might be related, or ways of combining two things to make a third. And category theory has tons of applications in mathematics, and it also has some applications in the foundations of mathematics. And that was one of the topics I worked on in my dissertation.
Nice. Okay. So you like worked on a specific subset of category theory, or like you just...
I showed how to recapture a huge chunk of category theory in a particular logical framework.
Okay.
So,
interesting.
Yeah. So the other topic was neologism.
That sounds complicated.
It's so like logicism started with Frege in 1890, and then carried on with like Bertrand Russell later, and then kind of died with Kurt Gödel, who
And were
is
those all philosophers or mathematicians or both?
both. Yeah. So here's Kurt Gödel. He hangs out with
Oh, you
me.
got a painting there. Nice. Look at that.
That was a gift when I left NC State. Um,
Nice. Cool.
so, but logicism was this project to say that, like, actually, all of mathematics, we don't have to have set theory. We could reduce it all to just logic. That was the project, and it doesn't work. It's broken. Logicism, it seems like, just absolutely has to fail for pretty complex reasons. But there's been a recent push to use something else, and so you use logic plus a certain type of definition, a certain sentence that people call a definition, called an abstraction principle. And so there's sort of a cottage industry among philosophers showing that, like, this chunk of mathematics and that chunk of mathematics and this other chunk of mathematics can all be recaptured in a certain type of logic, second order logic, plus these sentences called abstraction principles, and you don't need anything else, just those two things. So I did that for category theory.
Interesting. Okay. So then you got your PhD in those three topics that you published papers in, and then you're given a PhD in philosophy. Is that kind of what it is?
Yeah.
And do you feel like a lot of philosophers have a background in math like you, or not so much?
Not many. I mean, enough. I'm not alone. And there are definitely philosophers that are better mathematicians than me. But like, yeah, it isn't the norm, I guess.
Okay.
Although using heavy formal machinery and being able to do some math is a pretty standard part of philosophy these days.
That's what I was going to ask. If there exists a philosopher that really doesn't have a math background.
Yeah, there are some, and there are there's sort of it's an artificial, not well policed divide, and it shouldn't be a well policed divide into two camps in philosophy. There's sort of what we call analytic philosophy and continental philosophy. Most American PhD programs will spend most of their resources training analytic philosophers.
Okay.
And analytic philosophy is heavily mathematical. So it's not uncommon to encounter philosophers who can do some heavy math. And like it's pretty normal to encounter philosophers who can, do basic mathematical induction and things like that. Like
I got
straightforward. That's a thing that people know how to do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So once you finished up that, then you've kind of been teaching the last 3 years or so?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you were teaching like as you were doing it as well, but like now it's been full-time teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. So my first gig was at Smith College in the math department. Smith's a great place. I'm not a huge fan of Western Massachusetts, but Smith College was a great college.
I was about to ask you where that was located. I was like, I've heard that name, but I didn't know it was in.
Yeah, it's a women's college in Western Massachusetts.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah. And
the women's college, but they have guy professors.
Yeah, I mean the faculty is it's all women students, and the faculty is like. I mean, it is a more gender balanced faculty than you'd find most places. So that's actually really nice. And it makes it for like an actual like very nice collegial atmosphere. I feel like some faculties can be like locker roomish almost, like too many men in the room. Like, this is just weird. Stop it. Like,
well, especially like being in Kim and I talked about this a little bit, but like being in math in general, it tends to be dominated by males. So
yeah.
So,
philosophy.
I'm curious about philosophy. That's similar.
Yeah, it is, and especially because all we do is try to make very good arguments for your points. But one of the things that can make your arguments seem great is you happen to talk really loud, or like,
yeah.
And so people can get a lot of street cred for really crappy reasons that way.
Okay.
And so it's really unfortunate. So anyway, Smith was more gender balanced, and I feel like it was a much healthier place because of that. And then the students, like the students were all women. You don't actually notice that very often. Like one of the funny things they told us during like our orientation to Smith was like, because everyone, by the time you get to where you're teaching a class at a university, you've taught elsewhere before. And like they said, like, think about all the roles that are filled in the classroom. So like in your ordinary classroom, you have like there's like there's certain roles that are filled, right? Like you have the kid that always asks questions. You have the kid that like the stoner kid that sits at the back and sleeps. You have like the kid that always shows up late. You have the
Yep.
kid that like um, always answers incorrectly. Like there's all these just like roles you see in a classroom, and they're like just notice that like while you're at Smith here, all of those roles are still going to be filled in every single classroom. They literally are. It's just they're all filled by women, even the ones that you stereotypically, when you think about the role, think of as being filled
Yeah.
by men.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was kind of fun to pay attention to that, but
I
generally you
believe
just
that.
didn't even notice that it was a women's college.
So then you went to Minnesota soon after that.
No, so Smith and then North Carolina for 2 years.
Oh, okay, that's right.
So I had 2 years at a postdoc at North Carolina. And there was I basically like kind of ran what they had as a logic program for the 2 years I was there.
Nice. That's
That was
awesome.
really fun. Yeah,
That sounds amazing.
yeah.
So what's your favorite thing to do in terms of like teaching, research on these committees that you're on? What would you say is your favorite thing?
Not committee work.
That's what I was gonna guess.
Look, I really do like teaching a lot of the time. I mean, there are parts of, like grading is part of teaching and it's miserable.
Yeah,
Especially because I don't care. Like I'm not interested in giving you a
exactly.
grade.
Yeah. You're just interested in the material and it's fun to talk about.
Yeah, and I want you to learn it. And I guess
Yeah.
like if you're not going to learn it unless I give you a grade, then I guess I'll give you a grade. But I don't. I am not vested in your grade at all. It's not of any
Yeah.
importance to me. Um,
Totally. This
but
light is like shining right at me. Sorry,
yeah,
I'm transitioning here.
just because you're beautiful, man.
Yeah, I had to hide this beautiful face.
But I do like teaching. I like the actual like thinking through the material and presenting it, um, especially when students can challenge you and like push you on things. I've had a couple of really challenging students in like a good way, students that like really force you to get things right, and that's fun.
Yeah. I believe
Um,
that's cool.
but doing research is like when it goes well, it's as fun as it gets, right? Like, um,
So, like when you're doing research, I was curious about this, and for anyone else that's watching that wants to pursue that, how do you go about your research when you're really digging into like new type stuff? Are you reading a lot of material, coming up with stuff on your own? Are you writing programs? Like, how are you doing all this?
yeah, I do read a lot. Like I read an absolutely enormous amount. I mean, so research is incremental, right? You don't make huge steps normally, right? You make
Yeah.
these tiny steps, and so a lot of what you'll do is say like, um, so like right now I'm trying to prove a certain logic. RWQ is its name. Isn't that exciting?
Scary.
It is decidable.
Okay.
Okay, whatever that means. And what you do is you go and find like similar results out there for logics that are close by, and see what breaks. Like, why couldn't they prove the more general result? And then you go look for other material that kind of like helps you fill in the gap, and you can kind
Yeah.
of piece together like maybe 3/4 of a proof this way. And then you got to figure out how to fill in the tiny little gaps, which sometimes is enormously difficult and enormously frustrating.
I believe that.
Because a lot of what you'll do, since I think I remember hearing Kim talk about this when you were talking to her, you're also deciding the questions in some sense. So
Right.
you're like, and you're building the systems, like, and so a lot of progress goes like this, like, you'll have like this question you're trying to answer, and you think that this is the tool to do it, and that tool will get you through like steps 1 through 10, but then at step 11 it breaks, and you're like, this tool isn't going to work. So you go back and you fiddle with the tool until you make it, okay, I think if I do it this way, I can get step 11 done. But then you have to go check, does that tool still get me 1 through 10, right? Because I changed the tool. Maybe it doesn't work anymore for all those things. And so a lot of it is this like really like recursive incremental steps to making progress. You build a tool, get it through this far, get it to the next one, and then like to modify it so it gets to the next one, you have to recheck all the steps you made and make a tiny bit more progress. And you keep doing that over and over and over again. And sometimes it's horrible.
This almost sounds similar to the types of stuff like I build actuarial models, and it's different than philosophy, but in the same sort of sense where I'll build something, it works for 80%, but the other 20% it doesn't. You try to fix that, it changes stuff up here, and it's like
yep.
frustrating.
I think someone with an actuarial background might be really good at the sort of stuff we do. Because, like, I mean, it is just model building, right? There's
Yeah,
something out there I'm trying to capture in a formal model, and
that's
yeah,
I mean, that's what we do as actuaries is build models to replicate what we think real life is going to look like.
right.
You
And
know,
one of the
in the
things,
insurance world, but
yeah, right. One of the things that I think students especially have a hard time getting their head wrapped around is like, look, models are supposed to be like the thing that they are modeling, right?
yeah,
But if it's exactly like it, it would be useless. Because
right.
the reason we need a model is because the thing we're modeling is too complicated. So if we build a
Yeah,
model that's exactly right, it would also be too complicated.
that's a good point.
So you
Yeah,
have to get things wrong for your model to
yeah,
be useful.
that's a very good point. Yeah, because you're simplifying things in some
Mhm.
sense, and
Yeah.
so
I
it
mean,
makes
that's the way to put it so it sounds like you're doing something sophisticated. The
yeah,
other way of putting it is like you're cheating, right? Like there's some part of it that's too complicated and you
yeah,
find a way to ignore it. I mean, like,
totally.
that's just cheating.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's like, I mean, at least in the actuarial profession, it's like we know that we're never going to be right, never.
Yeah,
But we want to be as close to as right as possible, as much as possible. That's
yeah,
kind of the goal,
that's right.
and that's the whole reason you would hire an actuary is to do that. So, I mean, probably
Yeah,
similar to yours.
that's
Like,
exactly
I'm,
right.
I'm curious with your modeling. Are you or actually, let me back up even further with philosophy in general and the stuff that you're studying. What do you feel like is the most practical application to life?
Yeah, this is good.
This is kind of one of those student questions, like why am I learning this math? Sometimes the answer is just, well, it's fun and there's really no reason to use it, but it's fun to learn. Sometimes that is the answer. Sometimes it is useful, and I'm just curious with philosophy how you feel. Maybe it's just fun to think about. Maybe it helps you in life. Maybe it helps obviously with arguments, like those kinds of things.
Yeah, argumentation theory is probably your best bet for a practical, well, for like a quick practical application. More realistically, the heavy, so the one industry that does hire philosophers outside of the academy is
Yeah.
these big AI companies. So like PsyCorp is the big one that people
Yeah,
talk
I would
about.
believe that. Yeah.
And
Interesting.
so a lot of this is just like, how can we break down this concept into component pieces and describe the relations in such a way that a machine can actually grab onto it?
Interesting.
And so that's a practical application. I think other than that, I mean, there are people that are employed by hospitals as ethicists, and not just hospitals, but government agencies broadly.
Is
Uh,
that more for like decision making? Like this person is like burned so badly. Like what do we do in terms of like keeping them alive? Like those kinds of questions, or is it like
Sometimes, or like, but more on a not on an individual scale like that. Normally, more like policy wise, right? So we're going to implement this policy. Is that going to get us into any ethical troubles later? Are we going to be making decisions that go
yeah,
against our core values? That kind of
gotcha.
thing. Yeah,
Okay. Did you actually study the philosophy of ethics very much in your studies, or?
as little as I possibly could.
I was gonna, because I remember actually the ethics class that I took at Gonzaga, and it was early in the morning. That was a problem for me. So I fell asleep most of the classes. I struck like that class was so boring to me. But I mean, the topics were fairly interesting topics. Like, I mean, a lot of ethical questions are. It's like, which decision do I choose? Like most of the time, I'm like, well, you could go either way, honestly. But it was, yeah, that class was pretty boring.
The dark secret among philosophers is that ethicists tend to be the least ethical people in the room.
Really.
Of course, I mean that's a massive generalization. There are lots of exceptions. I have many good friends who are ethicists, and I
Yeah.
think they do excellent work, and they're not awful people. But the joke is always like, well, if you found ethics really interesting, it's probably because you thought it was confusing, which just means you don't know what the right thing to do is, pretty much ever.
That is awesome. I like that.
um, On the other hand, if you want to actually see people yelling at each other at a philosophy conference, you don't go to the ethics table. You go to where people are talking about logic and philosophy and math. That's where they get fired up. Right?
Do you
People
get
will get angry and
pretty
yell at
fired
each other.
up?
Sometimes, yeah. I'm a fire upable kind of dude,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah. I can see that. Getting a heated argument.
That's right. No, 2 exists. I swear, the number
I
2
promise you.
exists. I'm not sure about 3, but 2 does.
I want to come see one of these arguments sometime.
Yeah. So,
So that's interesting. So you enjoy the teaching aspect. Do you like with teaching? Are you engaging your students a lot? Are you doing a lot of like arguing in class, or is it a lot of kind of whiteboarding it type of stuff?
I do both, I think. I guess I do. I
Do you
mean,
use whiteboards or are you using smart boards?
I've never used a smartboard in my life.
Oh, you haven't? Or are you still a
No.
chalkboard guy?
If they've got a chalkboard, I'll take that. I
I
prefer
love
that.
I love
Yeah.
chalkboards.
Dude, there was a sociologist that studied this.
Really?
And yeah, no, so this sounds like I am so glad I'm not in sociology when you hear about the experiments they do. They sound like there's a chunk in the middle of doing an experiment that sounds so boring, and I want
Really?
nothing to do with it. What they did was they had a person lecturing, and they just had it recorded, and then they just listened to the sound, and they marked like when he hit the board with his chalk and when you could hear the chalk hitting the board. And then they also watched the video without sound and marked when students looked up. And like students look up and know to pay attention when they hear the chalk hit the board. And like there's also
Really?
different ways of like the way you can hit the board with the chalk that make different noises. And
Wow.
people and you just instinctively learn pretty quickly like when to look up for these things, when to pay attention, when to take notes based on the sound of things. And none of that comes through with a whiteboard.
That's actually a good point. That's interesting. So, like, if you're getting really excited about a proof and you're just like hitting the chalkboard,
Yeah, people know you're excited, and you can
yeah,
communicate to them. There's this extra like little way of communicating that you
yeah.
lose when you go to a whiteboard.
I had a professor once. This is actually before Gonzaga. I don't know if you remember, but I transferred to Gonzaga. So
Where were you first?
I was at University of Portland in Oregon,
Oh, okay.
and then I was actually at Whitworth for 1 semester in Spokane, and then I was at Gonzaga. So I was at Gonzaga for 3 years, which is why you and I weren't in any classes like at the beginning together. I think it was because it was my junior year when I started there, and then that was my junior year, senior year, and then super senior year there.
Yeah, I didn't know we didn't take classes together because I didn't attend the classes.
No, I know. Exactly, you didn't. And Kim even told me, she's like you guys were in the same class and you didn't notice her for a while, and she's like, but I'm your wife, like you should have noticed me.
Yeah, she complains about that all the time. Apparently, we took lots of classes together, and I had no idea she existed.
That's hilarious. But no, I was gonna say at University of Portland when I was there, I had a professor, and I think it was discrete math or something. It was some class. He was getting all excited. He was writing on the chalkboard. He ran out of room, and he just kept going along the wall, and he just kept writing, and then the wall started like turning, and he like started going on the like around the wall. And he until he was done. He just kept going until he didn't decide to go down on the chalkboard. He was just too excited.
Kept going across. I like
that. We were dying laughing. It was hilarious. I don't even know if it came off the wall either.
Yeah. There was a story I was going to tell, but I lost it. Oh well. Must not have been a good one.
Actually, speaking of this, since we are getting close to an hour, and I was going to try to keep these a little shorter, but it was too fun talking to you. So I wanted to ask you 2 fun questions at the end, is what I did with Kim. And the first question is, what is your favorite story in terms of being a professor or as a student that you can remember in class story?
Okay, so it's a little inappropriate, but it's funny, so I'll tell you anyway.
It'll be entertaining.
So one of the things philosophers talk about is properties. So like you can think about the property of being red, and then there's also predicates, which are words like is, or phrases like is red.
Yep.
But is red is just a phrase. It's a chunk of language. It's not the property of being red. The property of being red is what things have when it's appropriate to say it is red. And those are different things, property and predicate.
Okay.
And if you have some predicate, say like Q, let's just let Q be a random predicate, and you want to talk about the property it's connected to, you might talk about being like its Q-ness. This is natural, right?
Yep.
Okay, so you can kind of see where the problem comes in. It's like it's pretty natural if someone grabs a predicate to call it P. But then, unfortunately, the predicate associated with it is penis. So I was one time in a classroom where someone made this mistake, and everyone, it was actually at a philosophy talk, and we were all just like giggling about it. We just couldn't handle it. We were all being very immature and giggling. And this person giving the talk was like, fine, if you can't handle it, I'll change it. And so she went through and got rid of all the P's and
These are all
replaced them.
like PhDs in the
Oh
room and
yeah, yeah.
everything. That's
She
hilarious.
replaces all the P's with A's, which turned out not to solve the problem at all.
That is hilarious.
Okay, there's my story.
That's amazing. You guys and everyone probably started dying
Oh
laughing.
yeah, yeah, it was great. It was hilarity all around.
That is a good story. Oh man. Let's see. I can't even remember my second question now. Oh yeah, second question was favorite place you've traveled in the last 10 years. That's what I asked him as well.
Oh man, we just went to Sardinia. That was pretty awesome. Sardinia was gorgeous. It's like
Sardinia.
right.
Did you say Sardinia?
Yeah,
I don't even know where that's at.
it's an island right in the middle of the Mediterranean.
Nice. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Like close to Greece, kind of.
it's just west of Italy.
Okay, gotcha.
So I mean, so we went to a conference. I had a conference at on the city at the southern tip of Sardinia. It's called. I learned how to pronounce it while I was there. Pronounce it correctly. It's Cagliari. There we go. It looks like
I'm not going to try to say that.
it looks like Cagliari. If you're an English speaker, you'll probably call it Cagliari. But it was gorgeous. Sardinia was absolutely stupidly beautiful.
That's awesome. Clear water, warm.
Yeah, yeah. We climbed on the sea cliffs there, and we kayaked for a while.
That's incredible. Nice.
And then I went to a conference and gave a talk. And
Okay,
all
that's
that.
cool. I guess that's one advantage to doing what you do. You get to go to conferences and
Yeah, that's pretty.
travel places.
Pretty great. Yeah,
That's a good perk.
yeah. We were in Europe for the entire month of June.
Yeah,
This
that's
year, so,
amazing.
yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Well, if you guys are ever down in San Diego, let me know. I owe you both a drink or dinner or something for doing it.
Yeah. Kim's mom is there, so we should
Yeah,
hang out next time we're in town.
I had forgotten that Kim grew up here. So
Yeah.
Do you guys visit very much or not a lot?
Yeah, actually we do. So I'm bummed I didn't know you were there. We were there in January.
Well, I actually just moved in January, so I've barely been here. Yeah.
Well then, next time I'm there. But yeah, we'll probably be there in the near future.
Nice. All right. Well, to end this, any parting words of advice for a student that is wanting to be a philosophy professor like you? What would you say to them?
Make a different choice.
There you go. You heard it right here.
All right.
Be an
Thanks, Paul.
actuary.
Yeah. Be an actuary instead. Talk to you later, man.
Talk to you later. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.